bag makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. Today I have a super quick and easy tutorial on how to create a gusset using directional fabric. It's really straightforward, there's only a couple of steps and you can create a gusset where the directional print is running in the right direction on both sides of the gusset once it's attached to the bag. It's really quick and easy, so let's get started. To fussy cut a gusset using directional fabric such as this one from Sarah Golden's Tiger Plant collection, you first are going to need to take note that instead of normally, as you would normally cut your gusset on the fold across your fabric, you're actually going to cut it down your fabric to ensure that as the gusset curves up on the bag, your print is up the right way as it goes. So I'm going to use this fabric. And I've got my pattern piece here from the S&S tote, and I'll pop a link to that pattern in the description below. And all I'm going to do first is I'm going to, because I have beautiful cactus on this fabric and I want to make sure that they are right down the middle of the gusset once it's cut. So I'm just going to fold the top and bottom in half to find the center, and I'm just going to mark that with a pencil, because what I'm going to do is line the pattern piece up centered directly over top of the middle of the cactus. So now that I have my center marks in my pattern piece, I'm going to lie it on top of the fabric. I'm actually going to do this sideways, I think. And if I go straight over top of these cactus, it's going to come off the edge. So I'm going to have to use this row here. And all I'm going to do is ensure at the top edge that the center is centered directly over the center of my cactus, and same down the bottom. So I'll just use my ruler to hold that. So down the bottom, I wonder if I can. So I've got my center mark and I'm actually going to put that directly in the middle of the bottom of the pot. So that one's there, that's going to stay there, and up the top it just fits on my piece of fabric. I'm going to check, that looks like it's about in the center there. So when we go to cut it out, what we're going to do, because we're not cutting this on the fold, we're actually going to stitch the bottom edge together to then have two pieces with the print going in opposite directions. So we need to add on a seam allowance at the bottom in place of that fold. So all we're going to do is add a 1/4 inch on, and then at the machine we will stitch it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you cut around your pattern piece with your rotary cutter or scissors, make sure that at the bottom you don't cut straight across the pattern piece. I rotary it, so I just use my ruler. I add a 1/4 inch on with the ruler and I cut across there and then around the rest of it. So you need to go ahead and cut 2 out of your gusset fabric. You can either have your fabric doubled over and cut them out at the same time, or if you're like me and you want to ensure your print is down the center of your gusset, then you do them one at a time so you can really make sure you've got that print nicely centered and everything is lined up. What I'm also doing at the bottom is I've got my pattern piece right on the bottom edge of the pot, so that once I've stitched a 1/4 inch seam allowance, this pot and the pot on the next one, because I'm going to position the next one exactly the same, those two pots are going to meet right nicely where that seam's going to sit at the bottom of the gusset. Not that you'll see it because it's the bottom of the bag, but hey, I'll know that I've done a good job on it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out 2 pieces, adding on that 1/4 inch seam allowance at the bottom end where the fold is of my gusset pattern pieces. Once you have your two gusset pieces cut out and running in the same direction with the top edge at the top, all we're going to do is place them right sides together, and we're going to pin or clip the bottom edge where we've cut that extra 1/4 inch on, or left on I should say. We're going to pin or clip that together, and then at the machine we're going to go and stitch these to join using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a normal stitch length of about 2 to 2.5 millimeters. So pause the video, pop over to your machine and stitch those to join, and then at your iron you need to press the seams open so they're nice and flat. And pop back here once you've done that. Once you've stitched your two gusset pieces together and pressed your seam open, this is what you should have. Two pieces with the print running in the same direction if they're held up as if they were on the bag, joined at the center, almost looking like a mirror image of each other, and on the wrong side of the fabric you have a beautiful little 1/4 inch seam pressed open. That is it. That is all there is to creating a gusset out of directional fabric, and from here you would fuse your fabric to interfacing or whatever is the next part of your pattern, and you're ready to move on. And that's all there is to it. You now have a professional looking gusset with the fabric running in the correct direction on both sides. So when you attach it to the bag, it is going to look really good. Hi bag makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. Today I have a quick little tutorial for you on how I like to ease a gusset into place. So for this tutorial I'm working on the Creatives tote, and I'm going to step you through how to clip the gusset into place, how to ease the corners into place last, how to clip them to really help them turn nicely around those corners, and then how to stitch and trim them to secure. So easing a gusset is something that some people really struggle with, but once you know the basic steps and the little tips and tricks to make it easier, it really is quite a straightforward process. So I hope this helps. Let's get started. To ease a gusset into place, you're going to need an outer panel for the bag you are making. So as I've said, I'm making a Creatives tote, and this is one of the outer panels. You're also going to need your gusset. So I've got my outer gusset here, which I'm going to attach to my outer panel. To begin, if you haven't already done so as per pattern directions, you need to make sure that you have marked the center bottom and of your outer panel, and also the center of the long sides of your gusset. So here's my gusset, and I've marked the center on both long sides, and on my outer panel I have the center marked for that as well. From there you're going to place your outer panel right side up on your work surface. You're going to place your gusset across the bottom, also right side up. And then to start, all we're going to do is simply flip the gusset over and onto the outer panel so they are right sides together. From here, you're going to match up the center bottom of the outer panel with the center mark on that corresponding long side of your gusset, and just pin or clip that in place. So there's my center mark, and there's my other one. So from here, the general rule of thumb with easing a gusset into place is that you match up center marks and top corners, match up the straight edges, and then you ease the corners of your gusset on the corners of your panel last. So that's the rule that I always follow. It means my gussets always fit, and if you were to simply follow the corner up and around, 9 times out of 10 you'll find that the gusset appears too short. So instead of, because we know that it fits, the designer, and in my case from all my patterns the gussets are a really good fit, and that is because you need to match center marks, top corners, straight edges, and then you ease the corners into place, and that means you get a nice snug fit, you don't get bunchy in your fabric, and the gusset turns nice and smoothly around the corner. So to do that, we've got our center mark joined up here, so I'm going to go up to one side and I'm going to match these top corners together, matching raw edges, and I'm going to clip, and then I'm going to work down this straight edge first. Just place a few more clips in it until the outer panel starts to curve. So I'm just going to pop one more clip in there, and then I'm going to, still working on this side, I'm just going to place one more clip along the bottom, again just until it starts to curve. And then as you can see, it appears that the gusset is too small. However, when you stitch it 1/2 inch and this is eased into place, it's a perfect fit. So to ease the corner into place, I'm just going to turn my panel so I'm looking at it this way. And what I find easiest to do is make a few snips using my little scissors into the gusset only, not the outer panel, just the gusset, about 1/2 inch apart and no more than about 1/4 inch deep. You don't want to go too deep because on this pattern in particular, it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So if you go too close to that, you run the risk of the fabric not being caught in the seam and having gaps. So for a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I snip no more than 1/4 inch into the gusset and about 1/2 inch apart. I always like to put my fingers through so that I know I'm only cutting the gusset and not the outer panel as well. So once you've made your little snips, and as you can see, I've got sew-in foam on my panels, so I know that because I basted it in place using a 1/4 inch allowance, all I need to do is snip up to that basting line. From here, to ease the gusset into place, all you need to do is hold each side of that corner and then using your fingers, pull the center out. Sorry, I put my fingers behind. I'm going to grab the center and pull it out to match the center of the gusset in this space with the raw edge of the outer panel, and clip. And then I'm also going to do the same, probably one clip either side I think will be enough. Just like that, and that is the first corner eased into place. Very easy to do. So from here, all I'm going to do is repeat that same process for the second side of my gusset. And there we have it, our gusset is clipped in place and ready to stitch. So come with me, we'll head over to the machine and I'll show you how to stitch your gusset in place. To stitch the gusset in place, I suggest you use a walking foot if you have one, just to help feed the bulk through. Use a normal stitch length of about 2 to 2.5 millimeters, and I always like to have my needle set to the needle down position so that everything is held in place when I stop. We're going to stitch using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so just positioning your panel under the foot, starting at the very top edge, line it up with your 1/2 inch and drop your foot. You can take that first clip out, and all we're going to do is just make a couple of stitches forwards and backwards to lock our threads in, and then we're ready. So as you can see, I'm stitching this with the outer panel right side up. I'm looking at the wrong side of the gusset, and that is the way I recommend that you stitch when you attach a gusset to a panel. As you'll see when we get to the corners, it's a lot easier to manipulate the fabric to get a nice curve. So for now, we're just stitching straight down this first straight side using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you come to sections such as for this pattern where you have a outer pocket that is coming out of the side seam, I recommend stitching over it a couple of times just to reinforce it. So stitch over it and then reverse back. And then forward again. Just gives it a little bit of extra strength. So as you come up to this first corner, as you can see, all I'm doing is flattening the gusset as I need to, so that the area I'm about to stitch is nice and flat. As you go, you may need to just pull the gusset back out to make sure those raw edges are meeting. You can just sort of adjust it as you go, and you just work your way gently around the corner, maintaining that 1/2 inch allowance as best you can. When you get to a part that's going to be bunched, you can simply just flatten that section of the gusset. It'll get a bit of a bunch behind and forward, but as long as the section you're about to stitch is nice and flat, then you're fine. So once you've stitched around that first corner, repeat the process when you get to the second corner, and remember to reinforce well at the end before you finish off. And that looks really good. Our gusset is eased into place. Once you've stitched your gusset in place on that first side, all that is left to do for this seam is to trim it down to 1/4 inch. You can measure and use accuracy if you like, however I just eyeball it, and because I've used a basting foam, I literally just follow the basting stitch I made earlier because I know that that is 1/4 inch. I just use my rotary cutter, however you can use scissors if you prefer. From here, to tidy things up, I then also like to turn my panels over and just go over that seam again from this direction to make sure any little straggler bits of fabric and foam and everything are trimmed off, and then that it is fairly uniform 1/4 inch all the way around, particularly at the curves. And just make sure your gusset is out of the way so you don't accidentally trim that. That looks really good. So that's the first side of the gusset done. And that's all there is to it. You've now eased a gusset into place, you've learnt some new little tips and tricks, and I hope that you find it easier, no pun intended, to attach gussets moving forward from here. Hi bag makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. If you've ever struggled to sew a full loop gusset, especially when it comes to getting those corners to ease nicely just the way you want them to, you are not alone. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to ease a full loop gusset into place step by step, which is a little bit different from the open-ended gusset technique I've shared in a previous video, and I'll pop a link to that video in the description below. We'll cover how to align the gusset and base correctly, how to match your centre marks and straight edges, and I'll also share some of my favourite tips for getting smooth, even corners.
If you've tried this before, or if it's something that's tripped you up in the past, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what works or doesn't for you. I'm also working on the Breeze Box toiletry caddy, so I'll pop a link to that pattern in the description as well. Let's go.
So first, taking your base outer panel, we're just going to fold it in half, matching short edges to find and mark the centre of the long sides. And then open it out and fold it, matching long edges and those centre marks we just made to find and mark the centre of the short sides. So our outer panel is all marked, so we're just going to pop that to the side for a moment. Take your gusset, and we need to mark quarter points on this as well. So we already have our centre front and our centre back from when we installed our connectors. So all we're going to do simply is match up those centre front and back marks and then fold out to each side to find the centre of the sides at the top and bottom. And same on the bottom. And you will notice that the connectors will also pair up, and that is perfect. Once you have your quarter points on your gusset and your quarter points on your base, it's time to pop them both together. So take your gusset and just flip it inside out so it's wrong side out. If you have a preference on the front or the back of your base, make sure that your front is towards you and the back or the base of your panel is away from you. So I've included piping in my joiners here, so I'm going to make sure that's on the back of the bag. Place your gusset over top so that the back, where you don't have mesh and you might have a label attached, is sitting over the back of the base panel, and the front is sitting over the front of the base panel. First, we're going to pair up the centre back of the base panel with the centre back of our gusset. So matching those two marks together and pin or clip in place. Rotate 180 degrees and match up the centre front of the base panel with the centre front of the gusset. And pin or clip in place. Repeat this for the two side marks. And from here, pin or clip the rest of the straight edges of the base in place. So that will be one pin or clip either side of the centre mark on the long edges. Once those are pinned or clipped in place, we're going to ease the corners into place. So starting on one of the corners, take your snips or a small pair of scissors, and I like to have my spare hand in the bag to push the base away because we're not cutting that. We're just going to make small snips into the bottom edge of the gusset to help it ease around the corner. You want to cut no more than about 1/4 of an inch deep, and I usually do them about 1/2 an inch apart. Right up and one over top of the connector if possible. From there, you should be able to hold the outer clips, and then using your fingers you can find the center and pull the gusset out to meet the raw edge of the base panel and clip in place. One pin or clip either side, making sure those raw edges meet nice and tidily. And that first corner is ready to stitch. So repeat that same process for the other 3 corners of your bag. Once your base is nicely pinned or clipped in place and you're really happy with how you've eased the corners in, and so what we're going to do from here is we're going to pop over to the machine and we're going to stitch to attach using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. To stitch the gusset to the base, we're going to stitch it twice. The first time we're going to stitch it using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and if you've used piping, you're going to stitch right up to the piping as best you can, though I appreciate on this first side it is a little bit tricky to feel the piping. And then the second time we're actually going to turn the whole project over and stitch it looking at the base, again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This will really help reinforce the base and help provide that extra security, because as you can imagine, once the caddy is fully loaded, it will be a little bit heavy. So starting with your work up this way so that your base is down underneath, and you just need to fold your gusset out of the way slightly. I'm using piping, so I've got my zipper foot attached, and I'm just going to guesstimate where I think the piping is. Make sure you've got your needle set to the needle down position and a normal stitch length of about 2 to 2.5 millimeters. And if you follow my piping method, then you'll have a different color thread in for the bobbin. All we're going to do is make a few stitches to start off, reinforce by reversing backwards, and then we're going to stitch around the outer base using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you get back to the start, just make a few reinforcing stitches over top of your stitching at the beginning to finish off. And that's the first row stitched. So from here, I'm just going to quickly change my bobbin thread back to the orange, and then we're going to stitch a second row, having our panel flipped over to the other side. Okay, so to stitch our second row to really reinforce this base, make sure you've turned your work over so you're now looking at the wrong side of the base panel and your gusset is underneath. Just working it under your foot. Again, make sure your needle is set to the needle down position, and if you haven't included piping, you're again stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance over top of the stitching you just made. If you are including piping, this is the row to really tidy up that join and stitch right up over top of the stitching you made when you first attached your piping. Make sure you reinforce at the start and then work your way around the base. When you get back to the start, just make sure to overlap your stitching ever so slightly and reinforce 2 to 3 times to finish off. And then the second row is done and your outer base is attached. So let's pop back to our work surface and we'll trim up this seam. Now that the outer base is attached to our outer gusset and it's stitched twice for strength, we're going to trim that seam down to 1/4 inch. You may know that I like to trim these sorts of seams twice, one from each side to help get a nice straight edge and really reduce that bulk. So I just work around with my rotary cutter, however you can use scissors if you prefer, and just eyeball a 1/4 inch seam and trim off that excess fabric. Once you've trimmed around it from one side, turn your work over and making sure your gusset is out of the way, just work around it a second time to square off any edges and grab any of that foam or fabric that just decided not to get trimmed the first time you went around. From here we can turn our outer bag, right side out, have a look at our gorgeous handiwork, and give that bottom seam that we've just created a really good finger press all the way around to help the seam sit where it's supposed to. And that's looking really good. I'm really happy with that.
And that's how I ease a full loop gusset into place. Once you've got your marks matched and work methodically around the edges, it really does become a lot more manageable, even at those tricky corners. If you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a like and hit subscribe for more tips like this. And don't forget to leave a comment if you've got your own tricks for easing gussets into place, or if you've been avoiding full loop construction until now. We'd love to know how you go. Until next time, happy sewing!
Hi bag makers, Lisa here from Andrie Designs. I often have people ask me how to stitch curves and what techniques or tricks I use to get a really nice tight stitching line and make sure it's nice and uniform and nice and gentle around the curve. So I thought I'd pop a quick little free tutorial together taking some excerpts from our poly crossbody pouch video just to show you what I like to do. The methods and tricks that I've found over the years have been really helpful. So hope it helps. Let's get started. So to stitch your two flap panels together, as I said, we're going to use a 1/2 inch allowance, and I really like using my walking foot for these sorts of seams. I just find it really helps to feed the fabric through nice and evenly. So I'm going to line up my panel with the 1/2 inch mark on my needle plate just before the top straight edge, and I'm just going to make a couple of stitches forwards and backwards to lock my stitching in. And as I said, we're using a 1/2 inch allowance, a normal stitch length, and make sure you have your needle set to the needle down position so that when you stop, your panel is held in place. In order to stitch a nice gentle curve that's fairly symmetrical, as we stitch, we're not going to be looking at where the edge of the fabric is feeding into the foot. We're going to be looking at where it is in line with the needle. So we're going to make sure that we maintain that 1/2 inch allowance directly out from where the needle is stitching rather than as we come into the foot. So we're just going to start stitching nice and steadily down this first side. And as it starts to curve, I'm looking up here at the 1/2 inch mark on my needle plate rather than down the front here. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, but the curve of the fabric is actually in from my 1/2 inch allowance. That's fine here. What I'm looking at is back here in line with the needle, and I can see that it is maintaining that 1/2 inch, and that is what we want. Another part of getting a really nice gentle curve is actually maintaining your speed. So if you find that you go slow or you stop and start a lot, your curve won't be as gentle and won't look as tidy as someone who stitches and just continues a nice steady speed all the way around. So again, looking at the seam allowance at the back here where it's 1/2 inch, my panel is just shy of that, but at the front here it's probably about 1/8 of an inch shorter, and that is fine for here because it's still being fed under the needle, but where we want it to count is back by that needle. So don't panic if the front of your panel also looks, oh no, it doesn't look like it's going to meet that 1/2 inch allowance. As you keep turning and rotating your panel, it will line up if you keep your eye back near the needle. When you get to the end, just make a few stitches to reinforce, and you can take your work out. And that looks really good. We've got a nice gentle curve that maintains that 1/2 inch allowance all the way around. So now for a top stitching length, we're going to use about 3 to 3.5 millimeters, and for a normal stitch length, a normal straight stitch, you would just continue to stitch down and around this curve. However, I like to use a triple stitch, which you may have seen in other videos. The process is exactly the same for top stitching as it would be for a normal straight stitch. It just takes longer to get there. So I'm just going to switch my machine over now. So we're just going to maintain the 1/8 allowance, make sure you have your length reduced from your basting stitch length down to your top stitching length of about 3 to 3.5 millimeters. And we're just going to work our way nice and gently around this curve all the way back up to the other top edge. As I said earlier, when stitching curves, it actually is easier to get a gentle curve if you maintain a fairly steady speed. It doesn't have to be fast, but it just needs to be fairly even so that you can gently guide the fabric and turn the fabric at a nice even rate as you work your way around. If you stop and start, you'll find that more often than not you will end up with not a gentle curve around your gentle curve, as ironic as that may sound. So just working nice and slow and steady around your curve. Try to maintain that 1/8 seam allowance as best you can. When you get back to the start, just make a couple of stitches to reinforce and you can finish off. You can take your flap out and hopefully you're as happy with your curve, oh, there it goes, as I am. So from here, grab your flap off the floor if you've just dropped it like I have and head back to your work surface and we will continue. And that's all there is to it. You've now seen how I like to stitch curves on panels, especially such as the poly crossbody pouch. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us via the contact page of our website, or you can post in our patterns group on Facebook as well, and I'll pop links to both of those in the description below. For now, that's it from us, so until next time, happy sewing!